Hi, I'm Kiki, an imperfect ally. Today's video is a little bit of a follow-up to my first ever video on this channel, which focused on systemic racism and the Black Lives Matter movement. So today I wanted to go a little bit deeper by examining the recent wave of protests that we've been seeing, and perhaps more importantly, people's reactions to them. I've participated in protests about this issue and others, and have always felt really lucky and blessed that the protests I've attended have always remained peaceful and safe. But that's never a guarantee. There are just too many variables at play. But we go because it's worth the risk. So when protests do go sideways, I think it's important to first remember that the majority of people that are there are just there to stand in solidarity with those who need support peacefully. They're not planned with the desire or purpose to be violent or destructive. Okay, so now that I've said that, let's talk a little bit about when protests do turn and sometimes become riots. Well, actually first, I want to talk about righteous anger. I think we can all relate to that feeling of being so angry that you just want to break something, and oftentimes it can be over something kind of silly. So when it comes to righteous anger, I don't think it's that hard to understand why you might want to smash a plate glass window. It's easy to say that there's no excuse for violence or destruction of property, and I think we can all agree that when we see those things happen, it's not ideal. But the idea that it's behavior that you just can't wrap your brain around is a fallacy. And what that comes back to, in my eyes, is ignorance of systemic racism. Because to not understand the overflowing of righteous anger that we've been seeing says that you don't see or believe that they have anything to be angry about. I once had someone tell me that I was too smart to believe in systemic racism. And my response was, you're too smart not to. So let's talk about systemic racism. Per capita, Black people are incarcerated at twice the rate of white people. I know a lot of white people love to bring up that there are actually more white individuals in prison, but when you consider that 13% of the US population is Black, and they account for almost 40% of those incarcerated, you can see the discrepancy. And I've brought this up before, but if your immediate reaction to that is that Black people just commit more crime, then I invite you to examine that a little bit more. Do you acknowledge that due to redlining and lack of access to quality education and a centuries-old system of cyclical poverty, that there might be a higher crime rate in Black communities? Or do you think that Black people are just predisposed to commit more crime because the latter is wildly racist? So another important statistic to examine here is police brutality. In 2019, 370 white people were killed by police. That's compared to 235 Black people, which sounds like more white people were killed by police. But again, Black people only account for 13% of the US population. If the populations were the same size, that would be 1,786 Black people to 370 white people. I have heard so many white people try to make excuses when they hear those statistics, bringing up that more white individuals are killed by police each year, or asking, well, how many of those killings were justified? And frankly, it's not about the justified killings, although to my mind, no killing is just. I'm talking about the times when the killings are truly and obviously unjust, like when someone is pulled over for having a taillight out, or a child is playing cops and robbers in the park, or someone who might seem a little odd is walking home from the convenience store. I'm referring, of course, to the murders of Philando Castile, Tamir Rice, and Elijah McClain. And those three in particular make me sick to my stomach. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that all three of them would be alive today if they were white. Their murders were racially motivated. And this is where I find the conversation often devolves. Defensive white people saying, you don't know that it was about race, you don't know what was going on through the cop's mind, you can't say that all cops are racist. I would argue that in a lot of cases, the cop doesn't even know what's going on in the cop's mind. And I can say that all cops are racist because all people are racist. Now, hear me out. I've discussed the concept that we all have racist thoughts and tendencies before, and we don't do a great job as a society of acknowledging it because it makes us feel guilty or like we're bad people. But it's true. I don't mean to imply that any of the cops involved in these murders are card-carrying members of the KKK or signed up for the police academy just to be able to kill as many Black people as they could. It's not what I'm saying. But they do have unconscious biases, just like you and I do, that if left unchecked can turn dangerous, especially when you carry a weapon for your job. In the shooting deaths in particular, I don't think the thought ever entered their head, I'm shooting this person because they're Black. But I do think that their unconscious bias and latent fear of Black people pulled the trigger. We have failed the Black community time and time again in these cases by not prosecuting cops involved in unjust murders, and oftentimes just placing them on paid administrative leave, waiting for the press to die down, and then quietly allowing them back on the force without ever addressing the issue. I won't get too deep into unconscious bias training and the ways I wish it was used to prevent these tragedies because, as usual, I'm not an expert. But I've said it before and I will say it again. Confronting your biases and giving them a name is the only way to combat them. You can't be anti-racist if you're in denial about your own racism. So, back to righteous anger. When members of your community are being killed at alarming rates by the people who are charged to protect them, and time again, nothing is done to change the system or protect people that look like you and your family, I think you might get angry. I know we'd all like to believe that we would never resort to violence or destruction of property, but you can't know how you'd react until you are actually in a position of persecution. Martin Luther King once said, "A riot is the language of the unheard," and Black people have been crying out for justice long enough. I do also want to point out that we know that there are white supremacists who attend protests in order to incite violence and discredit the movement. Don't believe everything you read. But what I really want to do is build empathy with people of a marginalized community who perhaps are rioting, because it happens. I read a really powerful story recently on Facebook by a Black mother named Lakeisha Benson, who went through a really horrifying ordeal. One day, her 19-year-old son collapsed on her front porch and told her he felt like he was having a heart attack. So, like any mother would, she brought him to the ER, and he was never even seen by a doctor. The nurse who examined him asked him first, "Are you on any drugs?" Which is perhaps a routine question, but when he said no, she pressed the issue, continually asking him if he was on drugs. And it became immediately clear to Lakeisha that this nurse saw a young Black man and assumed she knew exactly what was going on. I believe this experience wholeheartedly because I know a thing or two about being discriminated against by medical professionals. More on that soon. So after running some tests, the nurse returned and saw it fit to first report that the toxicology report was clear. She diagnosed him with anxiety and sent the family home. A couple of years later, Lakeisha Benson lost her son to a congenital heart defect that could have been treated if he'd been taken seriously by the nurse who saw him that day. When she found out that information from the autopsy, she said she was so angry that she wanted to burn down the hospital. She didn't care who was inside, the parents, children, nurses, doctors. She just wanted to destroy it. I'm not even a mother, and I get that. And if you are a mother, then you really get it. It's how many people felt when they heard George Floyd call out for his mama as he was being callously murdered by a police officer, who I do believe is a racist piece of trash and not a victim of his own ignorance, but I digress. I am not saying that setting a police station on fire is a productive response, nor do I condone it, but I can understand the motivation to do it. It makes me think of the rabid anger that Americans felt after 9/11 and how many people supported the war in Iraq who wouldn't otherwise due to their emotions about that day. I've seen this meme circulating around on social media that says, "It's awful that that man was killed, but there's no excuse for destruction of property." And it invites you to switch the clauses there. It's awful that property is being destroyed, but there is no excuse for killing that man. You have to prioritize the right part. I think I need to end here and probably revisit this topic again at a later date because it's making me emotional. I consider myself a pretty measured person, but I still kind of want to hit something. So I'm linking to the Prison Policy Initiative where I got the statistics about incarceration by race and police brutality. They have a lot of other information about the topic that I encourage you to check out. I'm also linking to the National Police Accountability Project, which aims to fix a flawed system and increase accountability in law enforcement. Also, I'm linking to an article from The Atlantic that unpacks the phrase defund the police because I know that scares a lot of people, but spoiler alert, it doesn't mean abolish the police. So hug your loved ones and love them enough to not allow them to stay ignorant. Share this information with them and help bring us all together because it's the only way we're going to affect the change we need. I love you all, and I'll talk to you real soon.